taking the time to join for this talk. How's everyone's DevConf going so far? Good? Awesome. So, as the title indicates, the rise of IDPs, internal developer platforms, or the key to how modern engineering teams scale. So before I get into it, a bit about myself. My name is Yatin, Yatin Badal, or Yat as everyone calls me. I'm a self-taught developer, currently holding the role of Director of Engineering at a company called SovTech. You can follow me on the Bluebird app there, and I do occasionally blog, and I will share the slides on my personal site above. So just to talk a bit about what this talk is actually all about. Actually, let's hold on before I get into that. Just to get a feel for the audience, how many of you are sort of engineering leaders? And what I mean by that is, do you lead multiple teams within your organizations? Show of hands. Okay, awesome. Cool. And would you say, a bit of a follow-up question to that is that your sort of DevOps maturity is quite evolved and you're mature in that aspect? Okay, awesome, cool. Perfect audience. So this talk basically encompasses a few of the thoughts I had when reflecting on my own organization or the organization I work for and what we need to do to evolve a bit further. So being a relatively young company, we're quite fortunate to be around in the time of DevOps. DevOps being just over 10 years old right now, which means that we could start from scratch with a lot of the key characteristics immediately. P.S. Sorry for the BuzzFeedy title. I promise you it's not too BuzzFeedy. Okay, yeah. Like I said, a lot of this talk is centered around how we could potentially evolve DevOps a bit further. But firstly, to get onto the same page, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, fundamentally we build it and we run it. But really, that's not where the whole story ends, at least, or starts for that matter. It's a little bit more complex than that. And I like this sort of summary from the Atlassian team. It says that DevOps is a set of practices, tools, and a cultural philosophy that automate and integrate the processes between software development and operations teams. Prior to DevOps, we obviously were in a scenario where everything gets tossed over the wall. Developers didn't really take ownership for a lot of their work and blamed, and vice versa, and operations teams, were left to pick it up and so forth. But really, this boils down to sort of 4 key characteristics of DevOps, that is. Collaboration and communication. One of the fundamental aspects of DevOps was to break down silos between teams, and this is achieved through effective collaboration, communication, and consistent communication as well. One of the second aspects is, or rather the second aspect is automation. As much as possible, automate as much as we can. This can be seen through sort of continuous integration, continuous development, and all the other aspects that are automated as part of the software development lifecycle. Continuous improvement. It's not something we just do. You have to continuously reassess your sort of DevOps capabilities and understand what can be done better, whether it be new technologies, the adoption of new practices, the changing of processes, etc. I think the last one, which is also very important, which prior to the sort of proliferation of DevOps was, for the most part, overlooked. The focus on the user, or in particular customers' needs, all the efforts that we, or rather all the effort that we sort of impart as part of the software development lifecycle should actually really tangible or relate or correlate to tangible user and customer sort of impact. So, you take all of that into consideration and you just do DevOps, right? Just do DevOps TM. It's that simple. It's been around for just over 10 years and we just do DevOps. But I'm sure a lot of you, myself included, share the same sentiment that that's not completely feasible or true. And sorry, there's a bit of delay. Yeah, and following on, we tend to grossly underestimate the complexity, not specifically related to DevOps, but in general. And this has sort of led us to poor implementations and, well, just so much in general. Poor implementations in the sense that everyone's interpretation of DevOps is also unique to their organization. I've got a few anti-types on screen here, wherein you think as an organization that you're implementing DevOps by creating a team called the DevOps team. Is that really the right way to go about it? Are we introducing another sort of team or structure or process that is actually fulfilling the sort of tenets that I mentioned previously or not? And what's really interesting about anti-type C is that dev don't need no DevOps. Not true. And what that kind of leads to is, there's just so much. We try and look for full stack developers that are able to do basically everything, right? I mean, I don't know if anybody succeeded with this. What we really end up with is, good old back-end horse over there, or spectacular front-end dragon over there, where we think we're trying to solve the bigger picture by finding this mythical unicorn person or group of individuals that can do it all, but we can't, because it's complex, it's difficult, and oh wait, don't even get me started about the cloud native computing foundations map. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried zooming into the map and trying to see all of the cloud native tools out there. It's actually a fractal that just keeps repeating, almost infinitely. Okay, it doesn't, but it's just horrendously large, and it's very difficult to give it a lot of attention because it's actually so important and so significant because so many of the enterprises in our industry actually leverage so many of those technologies and so forth. So, and then moving on further, it's now become a bit of a science, DevOps. There's very compelling and good research out there, in particular, the sort of research from the Accelerate book, which indicates that there's a very clear distinction between high-performing and highly evolved DevOps organizations in comparison to those that aren't. And they talk about 4 key metrics, really. These 4 key metrics underpin what a successful sort of delivery organization is, or an organization that focuses on optimal delivery. And these metrics are lead time, or rather deployment frequency, lead time for changes, time to restoration, and change failure rate. So their research indicates that elite performing teams are able to ship multiple times per day. The lead time for changes is less than a day, less than a day, yeah, and their time to restore service is less than an hour, and their change failure rate is between 0 and 15%. It's very interesting when you look at all of this and everything I've said, because it's a lot. I mean, it's hard for us to find the right people, to create the right processes. Now we have a way to measure it. It's proven and quantifiable, and yeah, it's just so much cognitive load. And really, again, further elaborating on this thought is, how do we then now evolve beyond this point? We've seen that we can rely on some of this research and it helps us move faster and so forth, but what's actually next? Okay, so continuing further down this rabbit hole on how I can make my organization better, I come across team topologies. Is anybody familiar with team topologies? Okay, awesome, brilliant, 1 person. Cool. So what's very interesting about team topologies is that a lot of what I've mentioned previously is distilled into their suggestions. Basically, they apply 7 sort of key principles to suggest a way for you to improve or reorganize in order to focus on delivery. And one of the key sort of methods that they employ is based off of Conway's law. So Conway's law says that the systems you produce is a reflection of your internal organizational hierarchy and structures and processes and so forth. So they employ something called the reverse Conway maneuver and say, how can we actually get to an ideal sort of team structure that is conducive to the type of software or systems we want to produce? And they do this by suggesting 4 fundamental team types. The first being stream-aligned, the second being an enabling team, and the third being a complicated subsystem team, and the fourth being a platform team. It's very interesting. I'm talking about platforms, but this is the first time I'm actually mentioning platforms. But anyway, stream-aligned teams are teams that focus on a particular business case or a particular stream of work. Enabling teams are designed or at least conceptualized to assist stream-aligned teams. They could do this in some, for an example, it could be mentoring the stream-aligned team. A complicated subsystem team is a specialized team that is dedicated to solving a particular problem. It could be something very math-intensive or machine learning model development or something. A platform team, which is very interesting, is responsible for developing out the internal platforms that are consumed by the other teams, but primarily the stream-aligned teams. And they also talk a bit about how we need to also rethink how our teams communicate. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dunbar's number, but it basically says that at a sufficient or at a particular point, our teams tend to, communication begins to break down, really. And that is based on science and so forth. And their recommendation is that your teams should interact in a few different modes, 3 specifically. The first one is collaborating. Teams should collaborate. The third is as a service, and the fourth is facilitating. So this is a sort of an illustration of how these teams can progress through time, or as change flows. We can see that the enabling team collaborates with the stream-aligned team in this case, that the complicated subsystem team collaborates with the stream-aligned team as well, but the second stream-aligned team communicates with that other complicated subsystem team as a service, and we've got the platform team there that provides a service. That's not to say that each of these teams are constrained to the modes on screen, but rather that it could be any number of them over a period of time. So it's all very interesting. Again, this is me diving down this rabbit hole, trying to scale this organization. Maybe I forgot to mention this earlier, but basically I've been at this company for about 5 years, and we've had to scale from 3 to about 200 engineers in that time. So really, that's why I'm at this point where I'm looking for the next sort of evolution of our DevOps culture. Okay, so further down this rabbit hole. Now I know that there is potentially a way for us to reorganize to better emphasize the delivery of our products. So I do some research. I see that, okay, ThoughtWorks is paying attention to team topologies as well, and so are they in terms of the 4 key metrics. So this means that we have a common way to measure sort of delivery, and the other is a way to reorganize and focus on teams. But the one that so a bit of a recap. DevOps is good. It's hard. We do suck at it. We can measure effective delivery. These are the accelerate metrics. And we can leverage Conway's law to optimize our teams. And maybe we should pay more attention to platforms. Yeah, so really the whole premise of this talk is to pay more attention to platforms. Right? It's been a bit late now in this conversation, and I'm now trying to talk a bit more about platforms. But platform engineering isn't anything new. I'm pretty sure quite a few of you here have platform teams, and their responsibilities typically is to sort of either provision, maintain, or own some sort of infrastructure or something within your businesses or organizations that facilitate development. We typically treat it as a function almost of sorts. But I don't think that definition is good enough for us to evolve. So I go looking for another definition, and lo and behold, Evan Botcher from ThoughtWorks is a very good definition for what he thinks a platform should be, or rather, a digital platform. A digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. So there's a few interesting tidbits that I want to highlight. One of them being self-service. We always talk about platform engineering currently where our platform engineers or platform engineers assist other teams or provide some sort of service. But really, if we want to make a very good platform that helps us evolve, it should be self-service. This means we should be empowering our developers to interact with this platform. They should be able to interact with it and be able to gain access to tools, services, provision infrastructure, get knowledge and support, and so forth. And then the last bit, which is my favorite bit, is compelling internal product. What's very interesting about this is that this actually makes you think about creating an internal platform that is treated as a product where each of its customers would be your internal developers. I don't know if that's like clicking, but it's pretty powerful in my opinion. And being preceded by compelling is also very interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because a lot of platform engineering currently, something is mandated usually. But when you add the word compelling there, it means that, or rather compelling, and you treat it as a product, it means that you need to create something that your developers can choose to buy into. So it has to be compelling to them. And applying product sort of mentality to it is pretty interesting too. And then, again, now I've arrived at the conclusion that, okay, cool, maybe I should think about investing in developing an internal platform that acts as a product for our development teams to help us move faster. So I continue to look at research. I see the 2021 State of DevOps report from Puppet. I do a quick grep in the report to see how many times the word platform is mentioned. It's mentioned about 92 times. And then I continue to read. I see this fascinating quote from Puppet. The most highly evolved organizations in our DevOps models are adopting a platform model that enables self-service for developers and curates the developer experience. Okay, that's also really interesting. So we're saying that the developer platform that we want needs to be a product, needs to have a very curated developer experience. Whenever we had a sort of platform engineering team before that actually put a lot of emphasis in creating a product with a rich developer experience that created a self-service opportunity for our developers. Cool. So internal developer platforms. You'll see there's many different terms here. So I've said digital platform, I've said internal platform, but really I think where the industry is going now is, it's very early as well, is talking about this particular type of platform that is treated as a product that is self-serviceable by your developers as an internal developer platform. So internal clearly separates it from external platforms such as Twilio's APIs or platform as a service organizations. Developer, again, it emphasizes that following along on that sort of product mindset that the developers are your internal customers, your primary users. So you should be listening to them. So you're potentially, could this internal platform or internal development team and platform team actually, for example, send out a Net Promoter Score survey to your developers to iterate on that platform? And then platform obviously characterizes the type of product in this case. Okay, but how do we actually go about building an internal developer platform? And the truth is, I'm actually not going to tell you. What really matters here is that an internal developer platform should be opinionated. You should be listening to what your users, or in this case your developers, want, what technologies you have, and then build a platform on that. There's a point in the Team Topologies book where they talk about thinnest viable platform, or TVP. It effectively means that, what is that thinnest viable platform that you can create for your developers internally? And what does that really mean, really? It means that it could be something as simple as a wiki page with recommended services and practices. That could be your first thinnest viable platform. It could be much more mature than that, but really you need to be opinionated about it. Having said that it needs to be opinionated, a lot of them have a few elements in common. Whether it be application configuration management, typically this is checked into some sort of source control, infrastructure orchestration. There is an expectation that developers should be able to self-service and define what infrastructure they need orchestrated. Environment management, it goes without saying, deployment management, and role-based access control. Okay, so there's a few elements. We've spoken a bit about how it's treated as a product, which should be treated as a product, self-service. Who's doing this right now? So there are a few organizations that are currently or have been on this journey for a while now. And just to reiterate, the mentality shift here is that product as a platform aspect. So Netflix has an internal development platform which they haven't fully disclosed, but they call it Paved Roads, there's a lot of content out there on that. Slack has one, which I'll touch on shortly. Atlassian has an internal developer platform called Micros, which effectively provides a set of self-service capabilities on top of CloudFormation. If you think about a typical organization, there are far more developers than there are operational individuals. So they've noticed this as well, and they've created this platform atop AWS that allows their developers to declaratively define what they need to achieve in order to sort of get their service or application up, and it handles it in the background. Spotify has an internal developer platform called Backstage, which I'll also touch on shortly. So just to talk a bit about Slack's Bedrock. Bedrock is built on Kubernetes, and specifically, it uses a single uniform Kubernetes API and expands on it by creating custom resources. You can see that they have a very clear declarative YAML file, which is then interpreted by their platform layer and allows developers to move very fast in terms of getting their production-grade workloads up. Another interesting one is Spotify Backstage, which is actually also open-sourced. They've been developing this for 3 years internally before open sourcing it. And effectively, it acts as both a service catalog and a fully fledged internal developer platform. Basically, they're able to also share content about how you should be sort of interacting and using their technologies, where to learn, and so forth. And in addition to that, they've built it on top of, or they've built an element of it on top of Kubernetes so that they can sort of provision and manage infrastructure, or rather developers can self-service and manage infrastructure and provision it. I thought it was also pretty interesting that they mentioned that how do they actually measure the success of Backstage? They said before it took 60 days for onboarding engineers to merge their 10th pull request. And then after Backstage, that number drastically reduced to 20 days. It's also a pretty interesting metric, to be honest. Awesome. So key takeaways. Team Topologies tells us to reorganize to optimize for fast flow. We need to think about platforms as products internally, where its customers are our developers. We need to be opinionated about this platform that we create. We should always focus on creating a self-service and delivering a rich developer experience as part of the platform. And by taking all of this into consideration, we hope we can reduce cognitive load on our developers. Okay, so to conclude, build your own, or at least think about it. Thank you. Any questions? Yes. sure. So the question was for anybody online is, what is the approach at my company with this? So, so the reason I've done a lot of this research is to try and decide what the next approach is for us. So we have a lot of, so I've put a lot of metrics in place so that we can actually measure the impact of whatever decision we make. Where I am right now is trying to figure out what the thinnest viable platform is. But what I can tell you is that this will be the second iteration of our platform. Our first iteration, we optimized for our developers who actually struggled a bit more with application bootstrapping and so forth. So maybe our thinnest viable platform initially was actually to be a bit more opinionated in terms of our application boilerplate. Cool. Any more questions? Yeah.
But the question I also have is, what scale do you think you need to be at to justify the budget for an internal development team? Because the examples obviously the company says 5,000.
Look, I think anywhere from 70 to 100 plus engineers, it just makes sense. It also, I think it depends on your industry as well. So with my company, we're a professional services company, so we definitely optimize for hiring more developers. It just makes sense for us. So that's why it also makes sense for us to invest in a bit of a platform, or at least developing that thinnest viable platform. Yes?
How many of those are actually available, or do you have to create custom internal development platforms, or how does that work? That's the first part of the question.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of the question is, how many actually support SSO? For example, do we have to create new teams and import all users and all user groups and such just to make it work?
Okay, so I think to answer your first question, a lot of it is not open source, purely because it's been built for their internal teams or to service their internal development teams. Secondly, the one platform that is open source is Backstage, which actually allows you to build on it should you wish to develop your internal developer platform using it. But really, the key takeaway is to try and be really opinionated about it. It should be sort of relevant to what your developers need. And then your second question about whether SSO or importing user groups and so forth, it really comes down to what technologies you use, and if you want to continue using them, then you will build a platform around it. Do you answer the question?
Yeah, to an extent. And things like Stack Overflow teams, does it fall anywhere close to internal development platforms, or what's...
Look, it could. I mean, fundamentally, we're talking about building something that improves our developer velocity. So, I mean, if you're saying that a very rich documentation and support tool, maybe more integrated into a platform of sorts, will help you improve delivery, then absolutely. Cool. Any more questions? All right, thank you.